In the bustling heart of New York City, two influential figures, Alexander Reed, CEO of the tech giant InnovateX, and Jonathan Hayes, president of Global Airways, found themselves at the center of an unexpected controversy. Both men, known for their visionary leadership, were scheduled to speak at the World Business Summit, a gathering of the world's most prominent leaders and thinkers. On the morning of the summit, Alexander and Jonathan arrived at the convention center, each wearing a distinctive red hat, a symbol of their joint initiative, Code Red, aimed at promoting technological innovation in the aviation industry. The hats, emblazoned with the initiative's logo, were meant to draw attention to their collaborative efforts. As they approached the security checkpoint, a stern-faced guard raised his hand, signaling them to stop. "Gentlemen, I'm going to need you to remove your hats," he said firmly. Perplexed, Alexander asked, "Is there a problem, officer?" The guard's expression remained unchanged. "I'm afraid those hats are not permitted inside the venue." Jonathan exchanged a confused glance with Alexander. "But these are just promotional items for our presentation," he explained. The guard shook his head. "I'm sorry, but the color red is associated with certain prohibited groups, and we can't allow any attire that might be misconstrued." Taken aback, Alexander replied, "This is a misunderstanding. Our initiative has nothing to do with any group. It's about innovation and progress." Despite their protests, the security team remained adamant. The situation escalated, drawing the attention of nearby attendees and media personnel. Cameras flashed, and murmurs spread through the crowd. Feeling the weight of the growing spectacle, Jonathan sighed and removed his hat. "Let's comply for now and address this issue later," he whispered to Alexander. Reluctantly, Alexander followed suit. They passed through security and proceeded to the conference hall, but the incident left a bitter taste. Later that day, during their joint presentation, Alexander addressed the audience. "Earlier today, my colleague and I were stopped because of these red hats," he began, holding up the hat. "This incident highlights a broader issue in our society, how symbols can be misinterpreted, leading to unnecessary conflict. Our Code Red initiative stands for innovation and collaboration, uniting technology and aviation to create a better future." The audience responded with applause, appreciating the message of unity and progress. After the summit, the story of the Red Hat incident spread rapidly, sparking discussions about symbolism, perception, and the importance of context. Alexander and Jonathan's handling of the situation was praised, and their initiative gained significant attention, furthering their mission to drive innovation in the aviation industry. The incident served as a poignant reminder of the power of symbols and the necessity of understanding and communication in an increasingly complex world. The morning after the World Business Summit, the headlines were ablaze with sensational titles. "Top Executives Stopped Over Red Hats," and "Symbols and Misunderstandings When Progress Meets Perception." In his Manhattan office, Alexander Reed sat by his panoramic window, staring at the screen of his phone. The Red Hat incident had gone viral overnight. Social media was flooded with opinions, some supportive, others critical. Memes had already taken over, showing the two executives looking frustrated at security with captions like, "Innovation stopped at the gate?" Jonathan Hayes called just as Alexander finished reading a scathing opinion piece. "Morning, Alex. You seeing this madness?" Jonathan's voice, usually measured and calm, carried a tinge of frustration. Alexander sighed. "It's everywhere. Some are turning this into a political statement. Others think we were trying to stir up controversy on purpose. This isn't the narrative we wanted, John." Jonathan paused, his tone softening. "We wanted to talk about Code Red, real innovation, tangible change. But now the focus is on a hat. Unbelievable." "You know how perception works," Alexander replied. "We get two choices, fix this or let it spiral." Jonathan agreed. Let's take control of the story. A press conference. We'll double down on our message. Leave no room for misinterpretation. That afternoon, the two men sat side by side at a podium in InnovateX headquarters, facing a sea of journalists and cameras. The red hats sat prominently on the table in front of them. Alexander leaned into the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, yesterday we faced an unexpected situation that started with this hat. He lifted it, his voice calm but firm. Unfortunately, in today's world, symbols are easily misunderstood. This hat, however, is not a symbol of division. It's a call to action, a call for unity between technology and aviation. Jonathan chimed in, his voice resolute. The Code Red initiative addresses real problems: safer flights, more efficient fuel systems, and smarter airports. We cannot let a small incident overshadow what truly matters. Let's focus on progress, not distractions. The room remained silent for a moment, then erupted into questions. Mr. Hayes, do you believe security's response was justified? Mr. Reed, are you concerned about your image being politicized? Alexander held up his hand. We respect the role of security. The issue here isn't about blame. It's about understanding. We're moving forward. The press conference ended on a strong note, but Alexander knew that media storms rarely settled so quickly. By evening, the conference seemed to have worked. Partially, news stations began reporting on the Code Red initiative, shifting the conversation toward innovation. Still, the red hat remained a point of contention. Jonathan sat in his study that night, nursing a glass of whiskey as he scrolled through emails. An unexpected message caught his eye. It was marked urgent and unsigned. You have no idea how much trouble that hat has caused. Be careful. Some symbols mean more than you think. Jonathan's heart sank. He forwarded the email to Alexander with a short note. This might be bigger than we thought. Within minutes, Alexander called. John, what the hell is this? I don't know, Jonathan replied, his voice low. But someone doesn't want us talking about those hats. The room felt colder. Suddenly, the incident no longer seemed like a simple misunderstanding. The sun had barely risen when Alexander's phone buzzed incessantly. His assistant's name, Claire, flashed across the screen. He answered groggily. Mr. Reed, Claire's voice trembled. You need to see this. It's all over the news again. The Red Hat incident. There's been a development. Alexander sat up immediately, tension running through his body. What kind of development? I think you'd better see it for yourself, Claire replied before hanging up. Within minutes, Alexander was seated in his study, staring at the morning broadcast. The headline read, Red Hats and Hidden Symbols. Is there more to this story? A stern-faced news anchor filled the screen. What began as a simple misunderstanding has escalated. Several online forums are now claiming that the red hats worn by Alexander Reed and Jonathan Hayes are connected to an underground group known as the Crimson Order, a shadowy organization rumored to manipulate global industries from behind the scenes. Alexander froze. The Crimson Order? He had never even heard of it. His mind raced, searching for a rational explanation. His phone buzzed again. Jonathan. Alex, did you see that? Jonathan's voice was sharp with anger and confusion. I'm watching it right now, Alexander replied. This is insane. Where is this coming from? I have no idea, Jonathan muttered. But we need to find out. First, it was just security overreacting. Now we're being accused of ties to some cult. It's absurd. And dangerous, Alexander added. Our reputations are being dragged through the mud. If we don't get ahead of this, it'll ruin us, and Code Red along with it. There was a long pause before Jonathan spoke again. Let's bring in someone to dig into this. I know a guy, private investigator, retired intelligence. He might help us figure out who's behind this nonsense. Alexander hesitated for only a moment. Do it. Whoever is pulling the strings, they're organized. The meeting with the investigator. Later that afternoon, the two executives met in a discreet conference room at InnovateX headquarters. Jonathan had arranged for a man named Sam Weller to join them, a former counterintelligence agent turned investigator. Sam was a no-nonsense man in his mid-50s, his demeanor calm, yet sharp. Dressed in a worn leather jacket, he sat across from Alexander and Jonathan, his piercing blue eyes assessing the situation. "So," Sam began, pulling a small notebook from his pocket, "you two wore some red hats, got stopped by security, and now you're being accused of being part of a global conspiracy. Is that the gist of it?" "That's the gist," Jonathan replied dryly. Sam nodded. "All right, let me tell you something. Stories like this don't just appear out of thin air. Someone orchestrated this, leaked information, planted rumors, and spun it into something bigger. The question is, why?" Alexander leaned forward. "That's what we need to know. We've worked on Code Red for months. It's about technology, nothing more. But now this Crimson Order nonsense, is threatening everything." Sam tapped his pen on the table, considering. "I'll start by digging into the origins of these rumors. There's always a trail. In the meantime, you two keep a low profile. Don't engage with the media until I give you something solid." Jonathan frowned. "What if the rumors escalate? We can't let this fester." "You've already made your statements," Sam replied firmly. "More talking will just feed the fire." Reluctantly, they agreed. The first clue. By late evening, Sam's first findings arrived in their inboxes. It wasn't much, but it was disturbing. A series of anonymous social media accounts had spread the Crimson Order theory just hours after the Red Hat incident went viral. Alexander read Sam's message aloud to Jonathan over the phone. These accounts were created the same day as the incident, and their IP addresses were masked. Whoever did this was prepared. Jonathan exhaled sharply. "They wanted to make us targets, Alex. This isn't some random rumor. It's deliberate." "Agreed," Alexander replied, his voice grim. "But we still don't know why. Who gains from this? And how far are they willing to go?" A threatening delivery. The following morning, Jonathan Hayes stepped outside his townhouse to pick up the newspaper. But instead of the usual crisp New York Times, a small red box sat on his doorstep. Curious and wary, he bent down to pick it up. A chill ran through him as he noticed the emblem on the lid. A stylized red circle intersected by a diagonal line. It was an unfamiliar symbol, but something about it felt ominous. Slowly, he opened the box. Inside lay a single piece of paper with just 3 words. "Stop wearing red." Jonathan's heart pounded in his chest. He immediately dialed Alexander. "Alex," he said, his voice shaking. "I just got a warning. A real one." "What happened?" Alexander's tone turned sharp. Jonathan described the box and the note. Silence hung between them before Alexander spoke again. "This is escalating," he said quietly. "Someone's watching us, John, and they're making sure we know it." Jonathan looked out onto his empty street, but for the first time in his life, it didn't feel empty at all. The red box weighed heavily on Jonathan's mind as he stood in his kitchen, staring at the ominous note, "Stop wearing red." He felt the eyes of unseen figures on him, even in the silence of his own home. A persistent thought throbbed in his mind. This was no longer a misunderstanding. This was a threat. By mid-morning, he and Alexander had gathered at Sam Weller's small, dimly lit office in Lower Manhattan. Files and monitors crowded every corner of the room, glowing faintly with surveillance feeds and data streams. Sam leaned back in his creaky leather chair, holding the red box carefully in gloved hands. "This symbol," Sam said, pointing at the circular emblem on the lid, "isn't random. It's deliberate." He turned his laptop toward them, revealing an image. The symbol's been used sporadically over the years, always in conjunction with strange incidents, corporate sabotage, unexplained accidents, and disappearances. Alexander frowned, leaning in. Disappearances? Sam nodded gravely. People who spoke out against certain industries, whistleblowers, executives, people who got in the way of something much larger. Jonathan ran a hand through his hair, his voice tight. And now this symbol's on our doorstep. Who are we dealing with? Sam sighed, his face lined with thought. That's the problem. There's no clear evidence that the Crimson Order actually exists. It's whispered about like a ghost story in high-level circles, a network of powerful figures manipulating industries from behind the curtain. Most say it's nonsense, but there are patterns. Alexander narrowed his eyes. So, someone wants us to believe this. Someone's using this symbol to threaten us, to stop Code Red. But why? Jonathan spoke up, his voice laced with realization. What if this isn't just about symbols? What if Code Red, our work, is threatening someone's interests? Sam snapped his fingers, pointing at Jonathan. Exactly. That's the logical explanation. Follow the money. Who stands to lose the most if you succeed? Digging deeper. For the next 48 hours, Sam worked tirelessly, piecing together fragments of clues. Alexander and Jonathan worked with him, combing through contracts, competitor reports, and suspicious events in both the tech and airline industries. The deeper they dug, the clearer the picture became. Late one night, in the glow of a single desk lamp, Sam dropped a thick dossier onto the table in front of them. Here's what I found. There's a conglomerate operating under a shell corporation, Verton Holdings, that's been quietly blocking advancements in aviation tech for years. They fund research to stall progress, lobby governments to maintain outdated systems, and acquire smaller companies to keep new innovations from hitting the market. Alexander's jaw tightened. They've been holding the industry back deliberately? Exactly, Sam replied. And now Code Red comes along. Your initiative. A project that promises smarter, cheaper, and cleaner technology for airlines. If you succeed, they lose everything they've been protecting. Jonathan's face darkened. So they're pulling strings to sabotage us. First the Red Hat rumors, now these threats. They're trying to destroy our reputations and scare us off. Sam nodded. They're upping the ante because you're a real threat. This isn't just business, gentlemen. This is war. The surveillance determined to confront the problem head-on. Alexander and Jonathan decided to monitor their surroundings. Sam outfitted their homes, cars, and offices with discreet surveillance devices. 3 days later, Sam called Alexander with a chilling update. We've got something. A black SUV parked across from your building. Same one from Jonathan's neighborhood 2 nights ago. Tinted windows, no plates. Alexander's grip tightened on his phone. They're watching us. More than that, Sam said. They're sending a message. We know where you are, what you're doing, and we're not afraid to show it. Alexander's heart pounded as he paced his office. We need to go public with this. We need to expose Verton Holdings for what they are. Not yet, Sam cautioned. If you go public too soon, you'll be playing into their hands. Right now they control the narrative. We need hard proof, evidence that ties them to these threats and their attempts to kill Code Red. Alexander clenched his fists. How do we get that? Sam's eyes gleamed with determination. We go to the source. The risk Sam's plan was dangerous but necessary. He would dig into Verton Holdings' digital footprint, trace financial transactions, and identify key players within the conglomerate. Meanwhile, Alexander and Jonathan would attend a high-profile gala for global executives, an event where Verton's people would likely be present. The goal: get close enough to gather information. On the night of the gala, the two men dressed sharply, their faces composed but their nerves on edge. Sam's parting words echoed in Alexander's mind. Stay sharp. They'll be watching you just as closely as you're watching them. The event was held in a glittering ballroom in one of New York's oldest hotels. Executives, politicians, and media moguls mingled under cascading crystal chandeliers. It was the kind of place where power changed hands with a smile and a handshake. Alexander and Jonathan moved through the room carefully, splitting up to observe. Jonathan approached a table where a group of airline executives chatted over glasses of champagne. As he listened, one man's words caught his attention. Code Red? It'll never happen. There's too much at stake. Jonathan leaned in. What do you mean by that? The executive froze, eyeing Jonathan warily. Who's asking? Jonathan smiled smoothly, though his pulse quickened. Just a curious party. The man's gaze hardened. You're playing with fire. Walk away while you still can. Before Jonathan could respond, the man turned and disappeared into the crowd. Uxd or the warning. Hours later, after leaving the gala, Alexander and Jonathan sat in the back of a black car, recounting everything they'd seen and heard. Sam called them mid-ride. I got something, Sam said, his voice urgent. A file buried deep in Verton's system. Plans for a coordinated sabotage campaign targeting Code Red. It includes media manipulation, threats, and… Sam paused. And what? Alexander pressed. A contingency plan, Sam continued grimly. If you don't back down, they're prepared to escalate. Car accidents, hacking your systems, whatever it takes. Jonathan exhaled sharply, his hands trembling. They're serious, Alex. Deadly serious. Alexander stared out the window as the city lights blurred past. His voice was calm, but steel ran through it. Let them come. We're not backing down. Sleep had become a luxury neither Alexander nor Jonathan could afford. Since Sam's chilling revelation about Verton Holdings' contingency plans, every shadow seemed alive with menace, every passing car a possible threat. Both men were guarded, but their resolve only strengthened. The morning after the gala, Jonathan arrived at InnovateX's headquarters for a private meeting with Alexander and Sam. His eyes were bloodshot, the weight of the situation taking its toll. You look like hell, John, Alexander said as Jonathan collapsed into a chair. I feel like hell, Jonathan replied. I barely slept. Every creak in my house felt like someone coming for me. They're inside my head now, Alex. That's how they win. They make us paranoid. Alexander poured him a cup of coffee, his movements deliberate. That's exactly why we can't let them. We're on the edge here. They're watching us, but Sam's watching them. That's our edge. Sam Weller, sitting at the head of the table, cleared his throat. He looked exhausted too, but his sharp eyes betrayed his determination. I've got more information. Verton Holdings is using third-party contractors for their dirty work, PR firms to spin narratives, hackers to hit systems, and… He hesitated. And what? Jonathan snapped. Sam sighed. Private security outfits. These aren't just suits and PR flunkies, gentlemen. They've hired people who know how to intimidate, disrupt, and, if necessary, hurt. We're dealing with professionals now. Jonathan's fists clenched around his coffee cup. So what's our move? We can't sit here and let them close in. Alexander spoke calmly but firmly. We hit them where they don't expect it. Sam, you said you pulled a file. Plans to sabotage Code Red. That's the smoking gun we need, isn't it? Sam nodded. It's enough to create trouble for them, but not enough to bring them down completely. If we're going to take this to the authorities, or the media, we need irrefutable evidence that ties Verton Holdings to this campaign. Jonathan ran a hand through his hair. How do we get that? Sam's face darkened. We infiltrate one of their contractors. I found one of their key PR firms, Bailey Strategic Communications. They're working directly with Verton. I have a contact there, someone who might talk if we play it right. Alexander didn't hesitate. Set up the meeting. We don't have time to waste. The informant. The following evening, Sam arranged a covert meeting in a dimly lit bar on the edge of Manhattan's financial district. The contact, a woman named Ellen Corbin, was a mid-level strategist at Bailey Strategic Communications. She had worked on PR campaigns for major corporations, but Verton Holdings was a different beast entirely. Ellen arrived wearing sunglasses and a scarf, her face pale with anxiety. She slid into the booth across from Alexander and Sam, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," she said, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Verton doesn't just play dirty, they destroy people." Alexander leaned in, his voice calm but firm. "We're not here to scare you, Ellen. We just need the truth. We know they're targeting Code Red. We need proof." Ellen hesitated, her hands shaking. "If I help you, they'll know it was me. They'll come after me too." Sam spoke softly. "We can protect you, but the only way to stop them is to expose them. You've seen what they're doing, spreading lies, threatening lives. How far will they go before someone steps up?" Ellen swallowed hard, her eyes darting between Sam and Alexander. Finally, she pulled a small USB drive from her coat pocket and slid it across the table. "This is everything I could pull without being noticed. Emails, call logs, campaign strategies. It's all there. But once you use it, they'll know someone leaked it." Alexander pocketed the drive carefully. "Thank you, Ellen. You're doing the right thing." She stood abruptly, her hands trembling. "Just be careful. They're always watching." As she disappeared into the night, Sam exhaled slowly. "That's it. This is what we need." Alexander nodded, determination hardening his features. "Now we take it to the next level." Verton strikes back. By morning, Alexander, Jonathan, and Sam pored over the files Ellen had provided. The evidence was damning, a trail of emails detailing smear campaigns, planted rumors, and payments to third-party groups for intimidation tactics. It was all orchestrated to dismantle Code Red before it could threaten Verton's control over the aviation industry. "This is it," Jonathan said, his voice filled with hope for the first time in days. "We take this to the authorities, to the media. Verton won't be able to recover." But Sam's expression was cautious. "It's not that simple. Once this goes public, Verton will know we're behind it. They won't just sit back and let it happen. We need to prepare for retaliation." Alexander stood, straightening his tie. "Let them come. We're not hiding anymore." That night, as Alexander returned to his penthouse apartment, he noticed something was off. The door to his study, usually locked, was ajar. His heart rate spiked as he slowly pushed it open. The room was dark, save for the faint light from the city outside. Sitting on his desk was another box, identical to the one Jonathan had received days earlier. Alexander's stomach churned as he approached it. Slowly, he opened the lid. Inside was a photograph of his home, taken from the street below, and a chilling note. "We warned you. Walk away, or the consequences will follow." His phone buzzed just as his blood ran cold. It was Jonathan. "Alex?" Jonathan said, his voice shaking. "My house? Someone broke in? They didn't take anything, but they left a note. The same message." Alexander's grip on the phone tightened. "They're upping the stakes." Sam was right. "They're retaliating." Jonathan's voice grew resolute. "Then we hit back harder. No more waiting, Alex. We go public tomorrow." Alexander stared at the photo on his desk, his pulse steadying. "Tomorrow, we end this." Outside, the city hummed, as if unaware of the war being waged in its shadows. But for Alexander and Jonathan, the lines had been drawn. There was no turning back. The morning of the press release felt like the calm before a storm. Alexander and Jonathan stood in the InnovateX boardroom, preparing to expose Verton Holdings to the world. The walls, usually filled with the hum of progress and innovation, seemed to press inward, suffocating them under the weight of what they were about to do. Sam Weller sat at the end of the table, triple-checking the files Ellen had provided. "This is solid," he said finally. "Emails, financial statements, contractor logs. It ties Verton directly to everything. The Red Hat smear campaign, the threats, and their plans to sabotage Code Red." Jonathan glanced at Alexander. "Are you ready for this? Once we hit send, there's no turning back." Alexander straightened his tie, a flicker of steel in his gaze. "We've already been targeted. Staying quiet won't protect us anymore. The only way out is through." Sam nodded. "I've sent copies of the evidence to trusted journalists and government contacts. As soon as you release the statement, the pressure will be on Verton. Their hands will be tied." Alexander walked to the massive window overlooking Manhattan. "This isn't just about Code Red anymore. It's about standing up to people like Verton, people who think they can strangle progress and intimidate their way to power." Jonathan moved to the laptop on the boardroom table, his finger hovering over the send button. "Then let's give them something they can't cover up." He clicked. The file shot into cyberspace, disseminating to media outlets, independent reporters, and investigative agencies across the country. Within minutes, news alerts began pinging on their phones. Verton's retaliation. By midday, the story broke across every major news platform. Corporate sabotage exposed. Verton Holdings caught in smear campaign against InnovateX and Global Airways' Code Red initiative. Journalists dissected the leaked emails and financial transactions, painting a clear picture of Verton's corruption. Public outrage exploded. Social media flooded with support for Code Red, while Verton Holdings' stock prices began to plummet. But Alexander and Jonathan knew the fight wasn't over. They expected retaliation, and it came swiftly. At 2 p.m., InnovateX systems began to crash. Servers flickered, screens went dark, and employees panicked as data disappeared before their eyes. Alexander burst into the control center with his IT chief, Melissa, already barking orders. "What's happening?" "It's a massive DDoS attack," Melissa replied, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "They're overloading our systems, shutting everything down." "Can you stop it?" Alexander demanded. "We're trying, but this isn't amateur work. Whoever's behind this has resources. Probably the same private contractors Sam warned us about." Jonathan called from the doorway, his face pale. "Alex, it's not just here. Global Airways systems are under attack too. Flights are delayed worldwide. It's chaos." Alexander clenched his fists, fury burning in his chest. "Verton's trying to drown us in the fallout. They want us to regret going public." Sam entered the room, calm as always but with a dangerous glint in his eyes. "They're lashing out because they're desperate. This is a cornered animal fighting back." Alexander turned to Melissa. "Redirect resources to critical systems, prioritize backups, and isolate any compromised areas. I don't care how much it costs. Shut them out." She nodded, her voice steady. "We're on it, sir." The breaking news. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the chaos began to subside. InnovateX's systems were slowly recovering, and Global Airways was regaining control of its flights. Exhausted, Alexander and Jonathan huddled in a private office with Sam, their phones buzzing non-stop. Suddenly, a news alert appeared on Jonathan's screen. He read it aloud, his voice shaking with disbelief. Verton Holdings CEO Simon Locke issues statement. InnovateX and Global Airways have orchestrated this smear campaign against us. Sam snatched the phone from Jonathan's hands and scrolled through the statement. "They're flipping the script. They're calling you the aggressors, claiming you staged all this to damage them." Jonathan stood, his hands on his hips as he paced. "They're painting us as villains to save themselves." Alexander leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "They're betting the public won't know who to believe. They've spent years building relationships with media and officials. They'll use every connection they have." Sam set the phone down, his face hard. We need to prove their hand one final time. Something undeniable. Jonathan turned to him. How? We've already exposed everything we have. Sam's gaze was sharp. There's one more option. They're contractors. If we can get someone directly involved in the attacks to flip, Verton won't be able to deny it. A dangerous gamble. The next morning, Sam tracked down a lead, one of Verton's third-party contractors, a hacker known only as Axe. Axe had been identified in the files Ellen provided, but his real identity was hidden. Sam, however, knew how to find him. Under the cover of darkness, Sam, Alexander, and Jonathan drove to an abandoned warehouse on the edge of Brooklyn. Axe, a wiry man with nervous eyes, met them under a flickering light bulb. "You guys are crazy for coming here," Axe muttered, his voice shaking. "You don't mess with Verton." Alexander stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. "You don't want to be their pawn forever, do you? We can protect you, Axe. All we need is your testimony, proof that Verton hired you to attack us." Axe glanced around, rubbing the back of his neck. "If I talk, they'll come after me. You don't get it. These people don't stop." Jonathan pulled out a folder of the evidence they already had. "We're close to burying them, Axe. If you help us now, you won't have to look over your shoulder forever." Axe hesitated, sweat beading on his forehead. Finally, he sighed. "Fine, I'll talk, but you'd better be ready, because once this comes out, the gloves are off." Sam handed Axe a burner phone. "Get everything together. Names, accounts, communication logs. Meet me here tomorrow night." As they left the warehouse, Jonathan looked over at Alexander. "This is it, Alex. The final push." Alexander's face was set in stone. "We either bring them down, or they destroy us. No middle ground." In the distance, the city lights twinkled like stars, but to Alexander and Jonathan, the night had never felt darker. The final battle was coming. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of tension, paranoia, and strategy. Alexander, Jonathan, and Sam were teetering on the edge, fully aware that any misstep could unravel everything. Axe, the hacker-turned-reluctant informant, was their last hope. A thread that could unravel Verton Holdings and expose the full scale of its corruption. Sam hadn't slept in 2 days. He sat at InnovateX headquarters, staring at his laptop screen as encrypted files streamed in. Axe had delivered emails, server access logs, and detailed communication records showing payments from Verton to subcontractors for the DDoS attacks, intimidation campaigns, and sabotage efforts. It was damning evidence, far more irrefutable than what they'd released earlier. Jonathan leaned over Sam's shoulder, scanning the files. "This is it. This is the smoking gun we need." Alexander stood nearby, his phone in hand. "We need to get this out before Verton gets wind of what Axe has done. If they find out, he won't last a day." Sam nodded. "I'll send copies to federal investigators, the SEC, and trusted journalists. Once this goes live, Verton won't have anywhere to hide." Jonathan exhaled sharply. "Do it. Let's finish this." Verton strikes one last time. Sam sent the files at 11:00 a.m. Within 30 minutes, news outlets had begun to run preliminary stories. Whistleblower reveals Verton Holdings' role in corporate sabotage and cyber attacks. Alexander and Jonathan watched from the boardroom as the news began to spread, reporters picking apart the evidence file by file. Social media exploded with outrage. Verton's name trended worldwide, but this time it wasn't as the aggressor, it was as the villain. Jonathan allowed himself a brief smile. "They can't spin this, Alex. We've won." But before Alexander could respond, his assistant, Claire, burst into the room, pale and breathless. "Sir, you need to see this, now." She turned on the wall monitor. A breaking news banner flashed across the screen. "Massive fire reported at InnovateX data center. Source unknown." Jonathan shot up from his chair. "What? The screen cut to live footage of smoke billowing from a sprawling InnovateX facility just outside the city. Fire trucks and emergency personnel surrounded the building. But it was clear the damage was extensive. Alexander's jaw tightened as he grabbed his phone, calling the facility manager. After a tense pause, the manager answered, his voice cracking. "Mr. Reed, it wasn't an accident. Someone planted devices, explosives." Jonathan froze. "Explosives?" "Yeah," the manager continued. "The fire suppression systems were tampered with too. It was deliberate." Alexander hung up, his face pale, but his voice steady. "They've gone too far. They're trying to wipe us out." Sam stood, his expression grim. "Verton knows the walls are closing in. This is their last-ditch effort to destroy you, to send a message that no one takes them on and wins." Jonathan slammed his fist on the table. "They think they can scare us into backing down? After this? No, we go harder." Alexander nodded. "Call a press conference. I want every camera in the country pointed at us." The reckoning. By 5 p.m., the InnovateX lobby was packed with reporters, photographers, and live broadcast teams. The tension was palpable as Alexander and Jonathan stepped up to the podium. Sam stood in the back, his watchful eyes scanning for any sign of Verton's interference. Alexander began, his voice resonating with controlled fury. "Earlier today, a deliberate attack was made on InnovateX, a criminal act designed to silence us and erase the progress we've worked so hard to achieve. We know exactly who is behind this. Verton Holdings has spent years manipulating industries, suppressing innovation, and intimidating anyone who dared to challenge their monopoly. Today, we have the evidence to prove it." He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. Cameras flashed, and the crowd murmured. Jonathan stepped forward. "Verton Holdings believes they can scare us into silence. They believe they can sabotage, threaten, and destroy anyone who stands in their way. But they're wrong. This isn't just about InnovateX or Global Airways anymore. This is about every company, every innovator, and every person who's been bullied into submission by corporate greed. This ends today." Alexander held up a flash drive. "All of the evidence has been handed over to federal authorities and investigative agencies. We will not rest until those responsible are held accountable, no matter how powerful they think they are." The crowd erupted in questions, but the two men walked off the stage, their heads held high. The fallout. Over the next several days, the evidence continued to unfold. Investigators seized assets, raided offices, and began questioning high-ranking officials at Verton Holdings. The conglomerate's CEO, Simon Locke, vanished from public view as charges were prepared against him and his board. Meanwhile, media outlets hailed Alexander Reed and Jonathan Hayes as heroes, leaders who refused to back down in the face of overwhelming threats. The Code Red initiative, once on the brink of destruction, now garnered unprecedented support from investors, industry leaders, and the public. Sam Weller met with Alexander and Jonathan in InnovateX's newly restored office one evening, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "You did it. You took them down." Alexander shook his head. "We did it. Without you, we wouldn't have made it this far." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, finally allowing himself to relax. "Verton played every card they had, and we're still here." Sam nodded. "And more importantly, the world's watching. People are starting to realize that the powerful aren't untouchable. They can be held accountable." Alexander smiled faintly, looking out over the city skyline. This wasn't just about winning a fight. It was about sending a message. Progress can't be stopped, not by fear, not by greed, and not by people like Verton. Jonathan raised his glass of water, to Code Red, and to standing up when it matters most. They clinked their glasses together. Outside, the city glowed brightly, no longer feeling like the battleground it had been. For the first time in weeks, it felt like a new beginning. The storm had passed, and they had emerged unbroken. 1 month had passed since the reckoning, a month that had seen Verton Holdings dismantled piece by piece. Their CEO, Simon Locke, had been arrested as he attempted to flee the country, his assets frozen, his empire shattered. Investigations revealed decades of corruption, intimidation, and suppression of progress across industries. It became one of the largest corporate scandals in modern history, sending shockwaves through boardrooms and government halls alike. For Alexander Reed and Jonathan Hayes, the dust was finally beginning to settle. The media hailed them as champions of progress, visionaries who had risked everything to stand up against corporate tyranny. Their Code Red initiative became a beacon of hope, proof that innovation couldn't be stifled. Dekusinbra in a celebration of progress. The air buzzed with anticipation as guests filed into the grand ballroom of New York's prestigious Hudson Center for the Code Red launch gala. The night was more than just a celebration. It was a symbol of resilience, of refusing to give in to fear. Leaders from the tech and aviation industries mingled with government officials, journalists, and supporters who had followed the story from the very beginning. Alexander stood near the entrance, watching as the crowd grew. He wore a small smile, a rare sight after weeks of tension and turmoil. Beside him, Jonathan adjusted his cufflinks. "Quite the turnout," Jonathan said, a glint of pride in his eyes. "They're not here for us," Alexander replied. "They're here for what Code Red represents, a new way forward." Jonathan clapped him on the back. "You sound humble, but don't forget, without you pushing for this, none of it would exist." Before Alexander could respond, a familiar figure approached. Sam Weller, looking oddly out of place in a tuxedo, smirked as he extended his hand. "I didn't think you owned a tie," Jonathan teased. Sam chuckled. "Don't get used to it. I only clean up for victories." He turned to Alexander, his voice softer. "You've changed the game. People are watching now. The next generation of innovators won't have to fight this hard." Alexander nodded. "That's the goal, Sam. Progress shouldn't be a war. It should be a choice." The powerful speech. As dinner concluded, Alexander and Jonathan took to the stage. The room quieted, every eye turning toward them. The weight of the moment was not lost on either man. Alexander took a deep breath, gripping the podium as he began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, 1 month ago, we stood on the brink. Not just Jonathan and I, but everyone who believes in innovation, progress, and the power of ideas. We were threatened, intimidated, and nearly silenced by those who feared change, by those who thought they could control the future." The crowd listened intently, the silence heavy with emotion. "But they were wrong," Alexander continued, his voice clear and resolute. "Change can't be stopped. Ideas can't be killed. And innovation, true, world-changing innovation, belongs to everyone. Code Red was born not from fear, but from hope. It is a call to action, a promise that technology and aviation can work hand in hand to build a safer, smarter, and cleaner world." Jonathan stepped forward, his voice filled with conviction. "The battle we fought wasn't just for ourselves. It was for the engineers who dream of smarter cities, the pilots who deserve better technology, and the passengers who believe in a greener future. The real victory here is for every innovator who's been told no and dared to say yes." Applause erupted, swelling into a standing ovation. People clapped not just for the two men on stage, but for what they symbolized: perseverance, vision, and the courage to fight back against insurmountable odds. The turning point. After the speeches, Jonathan and Alexander mingled with guests. Investors pledged further support for Code Red, politicians spoke of systemic reforms, and young entrepreneurs approached with inspired faces, eager to share their ideas. As the night wore on, Jonathan pulled Alexander aside to the balcony, away from the noise and lights. The view of New York City stretched out before them, glittering like a sea of stars. "You know," Jonathan said quietly, "there was a moment when I thought we wouldn't make it through this." Alexander smirked faintly. "Which moment? There were a lot of close calls." Jonathan chuckled, his gaze distant. "The night of the first threat, the red box. I thought we were finished." Alexander nodded, his expression softening. "Me too. But fear only wins if you let it. If nothing else, Verton taught us that." Jonathan turned to him, his voice more serious. "So what now? Code Red is secure. The world is watching us. What's the next step?" Alexander looked out over the city, his face calm but filled with purpose. "We keep pushing forward. The work doesn't stop just because we won this fight. There's more to fix, more to innovate. This, what we've built, is just the beginning." Jonathan smiled. "To the next chapter, then." "To the next chapter," Alexander echoed. A quiet moment. Later that night, as the gala wound down, Alexander found himself alone on the stage. The room was nearly empty, the remnants of celebration lingering in the air. He picked up one of the red hats, now a symbol not of division, but of perseverance. Turning it in his hands, he remembered the first day he and Jonathan had worn them. The scornful looks, the confrontation at security, the chaos that followed. What had once been a simple promotional hat was now a powerful statement. "You cannot silence progress." Sam Weller's voice broke the silence as he approached. "Funny how it all started with something so small, huh?" Alexander smiled faintly, holding the hat up. "Sometimes the smallest symbols hold the greatest power." Sam nodded, crossing his arms. "You know, there's one thing about you two that Verton underestimated." "What's that?" Alexander asked. Sam grinned. "Your stubbornness." Alexander chuckled softly. "It's hard to back down when you know you're doing the right thing." Sam clapped him on the shoulder. "Keep that fire, Alex. The world needs it." The final word. 2 weeks later, an editorial appeared on the front page of the New York Times, penned by Alexander Reed. "Progress is not comfortable, it's not safe, and it's not easy. But it's necessary. Those who fear it will always try to stop it, to control it, to bury it under fear and intimidation. But progress is resilient, and so are the people who believe in it. The future belongs to those who have the courage to build it. One idea, one challenge, and one step at a time." The piece ended with a simple phrase, one that would come to define their legacy. "Keep moving forward, no matter who tries to hold you back." And so they did.